Hello, Story Seekers. I'm Ben.
I'm Nico, and you're listening to The Tiny Bookcase.
Our guest for this episode is a multi award winning novelist whose works explore the deep themes such as artificial intelligence and alien awareness within epic galactic and fantastical settings.
But don't forget, he's also a prolific short story writer. Book 3 in his The Tyrant Philosophers series, called Days of Shattered Faith, is, rather excitingly, out now. We would like to warmly welcome Adrian Tchaikovsky.
Hello, Adrian.
Hello, thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks for coming. I think you may well be the most prolific person we've ever had on the pod. So it's a real honour to chat with you and get your take on storytelling and swap a few tales. But we also encountered each other at FantasyCon recently in Chester, and you were on a panel about tabletop role playing games. So I thought, just to open us up, I was quite interested to hear that, as a role playing game enthusiast, where do you actually find the time to write loads of great books and also game master for your group?
I mean, it can be a bit of a challenge fitting gaming in, as pretty much everyone of sort of beyond school age tends to find. But
Yeah.
yes, because I guess it helps. I'm now a full-time writer, so I can get the writing done during the day and free the evenings up for gaming, and just hope that nobody else has some sort of a scheduling issue.
Yeah, that's good. Do you find it works the same bits of your brain? Like, obviously they are connected, the idea of telling a story and writing a story.
There's a lot of transferable skills. I mean, I very much started off as a games master, and then when I started writing, a lot of the world building and character design sort of practice that you get from gaming is directly transferable into writing. And I think it gives you a lot of good habits if you are interested in making very robust and immersive worlds.
Have you ever tested a plot point or a character on your tabletop players before they've gone in a book?
Not yet. I mean, my very first series, The Shadows of the Apt books, they were based on a role-playing campaign, but it was mostly the world that made it into the books and a few of the NPCs. I do kind of have a fantasy setting. I'm kicking about the idea of maybe trialing as a campaign setting first and then writing in it once the campaign's done.
Yeah, we are free if you want some playtesters for that one. Oh, fantastic. Well, I think it's probably time we get to the stories. The prompt for this week was drawn from the name of Adrian's new book, The Days of Shattered Faith, and it's Shattered. So, Nico, you're going to be up first. Break me.
Shattered. Delphine clenched her teeth. They creaked ominously. What had happened here was an affront. It would be repaid tenfold by her hand, 1,000-fold by the legions that served her. Desecration was a sin of the weak and a crime of the faithless. It would be paid for at the cost of their flesh. An acolyte scribe moved close. Its trailing robes dragged dust and fragments of beautifully coloured glass with them. Those fragments would be ensconced in those folds now. Tiny, dangerous elements. It knelt, with no concern for whatever worked as a knee joint in the fabric folds, and offered his as yet human face to Delphine. "Commander, have you words?" Had she? Not yet. The twitching flesh fingers of the scribe's right hand fiddled incessantly with a quill. It itched to write. The mechanical left arm ended in a great leather tome, which sat, as ever, open and ready to receive whatever the commander would share. The librarium seraphim was filled from basement to high vaults with such tomes, each a testament to the righteous work of the church. I have none, scribe. Follow. Delphine moved through the cathedral. She caused swirling stirrings in the tide of dust. Fragments of marble made so light they might swim in mid-air. They glittered in the pale light that washed the pews. The dim mauve of the prayer interface left the space between the seats muddled and ominous. Yet no fear swelled in the breast of Delphine. She swept like an ancient predator the length of the building, until she stood before a broad aperture. Through it the sky was so purple it was hard to look upon. It drank light, so that even the stars seemed minute pinpricks. At the arch's apex, the planet's moon hung, an odd yellow blot on the otherwise sinister canopy. Do you know why this window was built here, scribe? Her voice was cold and level. It ran on a passion unusual to most. Fervour and fanaticism were veiled by the chill of it. It made her dangerous. The scribe raised its face to look at the gaping hole.
Do you require factual statements? If so, I will fetch a remembrancer for you. I am afraid I am not equipped to answer questions regarding architectural functionality.
Delphine sneered. While the demi-human acolytes were of much use, they lacked the parts which made, to her, humans human. They could not think beyond the bounds of the tasks they were assigned. They could not believe. Note the shards of coloured glass that still ring its edges. This was once a glorious monument. The glass herein depicted the Saint Delphine, for whom I am named. She allowed pride to swim a moment, though she told herself it was a sense of duty and honour. I have words, I believe. The scribe lowered itself once again into a prepared position. Its awkward stance of supplication was met with the crunching of glass shards beneath its heavy robes. Such disrespect, but then, was it capable of such a thought? The quill hovered pendulously above a page, and as a single drop of scarlet fluid left the nib and impacted gently on the paper, Delphine began to orate. Herein, the cathedral of the sanctuary of the Holy Mother ascended, 3 grand windows stood, and in them glass, coloured, and fashioned to the likeness of the 3 great saints. The glass that shows Saint August, who we call Father, yet remains. So too, facing against it, does the Saint Remy, she who is called the Servant. Praise unto them, and their miracles ever. The fundaments of faith deliver us from sin by their teachings of peace and gratitude. The final mural, though I find shattered, filth work brought here by unsavoury hands. Its beauty, before the unworthy struck, was beyond compare. In glasses drawn from our sand worlds, and coloured with the righteous gatherings of our faith, did they depict Saint Delphine. Her radiance therein was shown, her mercy too depicted, for was her blade not at her side, and her eye fixed on those who stood before her? She that we call Judgment, the dearest saint, who is tasked by divinity to judge against those who walk the myriad words of our faith. By my hand shall those sins be brought to bear. Judgment shall be given, for even as they try to steal her gaze, they cannot take away the eyes of those devout enough to stand in her shade, and draw a sword where she may not. Praise be, and unto Delphine may these reparations be delivered. Praise be the blessed saint. Praise be. End. The scratching stopped before the final word was even finished. The scribe turned its face, and from its mouth sent soft, chill air to cool the ink before the page could be turned. Around the names of the saints were flourishes, and tiny emblems marked the words as sacred. Pride once more swelled within her heart, and Delphine turned again to look upon the wreckage of the stained glass. Stepping away from the wretched scribe, she crossed some rubble and scanned the remains. There, she found a piece enough to galvanize her troops. A series of unconnected shards that made a stern woman's face. It was fringed by jet black hair, and a scar ran from beneath the left eye to meet the corner of the mouth. Delphine ran a finger along her matching scar, the mark of her order. A thrill, not unlike a fornicator's desire, ran through her, and she mastered it, for now. Bending, she took up the piece in both hands. It was heavy. She turned its face away from her, so that their heads were facing the same way. One sat beneath its charcoaled hair, the other larger and shimmering in the sickly pew light sat beneath. She strode the length of the cathedral again, this time finding the large brass doors at the end and positioning herself centrally to them. The scribe and several other mechanoid acolytes had followed her trail, their gathering of holy words, relics, and rubble now done. "Open the door." She said it so softly, and yet it seemed to echo around the cathedral like the chatter of a stub gun. Diligently, 2 acolytes, their broad backs and thick arms marking them as luggers, moved and pushed the gargantuan doors wide. The seething mass of crusaders outside turned, their dust and blood-stained tabards seeming to shift as one into a sea of emblems. Each wore the eye and scar of Delphine. Dotted among them, slender mechanoids stood, and each tilted their head back. At their mouths, the heads split wide, and broad, pulsing speakers emerged from their faces. Delphine began to speak, and an acolyte near her leant in. The words echoed strangely as they were poured through the crowd by the linked creatures. Ugly, but necessary. She held aloft the glass, a holy relic in the making. "My children, the sacred saint has been defiled here. Gaze upon her image, but note how it is whole. That cannot be undone, for she is judgment, and her eyes cannot be escaped." Murmurations of Amen swept through the huddled mass. "The world now must be judged. None have admitted to this crime, so instead show them which saint they have betrayed. They may believe mercy will come to them, but August saw what they did. They will claim themselves servants of the saints, but Remy too saw their actions. Thus only judgment remains. Offer them a chance at honesty. Each that cannot bring a truth, take something else from them instead. A hand, an eye, a child. Weigh it against their sins, and have confession from them all. And if none will admit to the crime..." The army seemed poised. The final distant echo of her words faded. "Burn this world to ash." A great roar came from the troops then. They drew their swords and bellowed her name. "Delphine! Delphine!" They chanted to the saint, of course. That she knew. As they streamed away to take up arms and find the sinners of this world, they bore the name of the sacred judge with them. But after all, was it not her name, too? The glass visage could not, but Delphine allowed herself a smile. 1,000-fold. She should have had the scribe write it down.
Crikey. Oh, you did so well to read that, despite that cold strangling you. Well done.
Yeah, I hope everyone's enjoying the sound of 30% of my voice.
Awesome.
Oh, yeah, yeah. That felt like June ran slap bang into 40k.
I was going to ask. I mean, I feel I wasn't sure whether it was actually explicitly like a 40k Warhammer 40k story.
It's
Purely from the feel of it, because it feels like you could probably submit that straight to Games Workshop.
Yeah.
change
Yeah.
Delphine to Celestine and put some Zoroaster stuff in there. I reckon
I
it
know
could work.
they got a million saints, I'm sure, in the Imperium. You're fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's definitely some inspo in there, but not directly.
Yeah, I think there are a few clues from me. I don't know anywhere near the level of lore that you guys know, but I sort of clocked a few things that felt not 40k. Like I know that they have those like servitor skulls that follow them around, and like they have little speakers on them, don't they? But that image that you constructed of the mechanoids in the crowd, sort of like tilting back, yawning their mouths, and then speakers being there, that felt more sort of like George Miller's Mad Max than yeah. I was into that. Yeah, I think you. Am I right in thinking, Adrian, that you have something in the Black Library? You've written.
Yes, I've got a couple. I've got a couple of novellas and some short stories with more kind of on the way.
Nice. Well, maybe you should be looking to have a swing at that, Nico, because I think you've clearly got that kind of big gothic style to get the world across.
It's probably a good idea because I feel like I've spent a lot of my time as a writer desperately trying not to write Warhammer and Warhammer 40k stuff by edging myself away from it. So maybe it is a good idea.
I mean, it's a fascinating gig because they are the editing process is really quite savage because they're very keen on making sure all the lore lines up.
Yeah, I know. I once saw a job listing on there that on their careers page that was for someone whose whole job was just to go to writers and game studios and be a lore snob, and I thought that must be the best worst job ever. That's not the noise a lasgun makes. Are you serious? But
Well, my favorite ever edit from them was I described like an agricultural world in 40k as being rolling golden fields and so forth, in contrast to the horrible place that the character was in.
yeah,
And I got an editorial note saying, no, every single planet in this universe is horrible. There are no nice places.
I mean that's fair.
Yeah. That sounds like they should really put together like a very broad strokes style guide or something for people. Maybe they do. I don't know, but that's a strong note, isn't it? No, there is no happiness. There is no beauty in this world.
You are about meant to be shit here, aren't you?
I think the reason that I said that it felt like June running slap bang into 40k for me is because there were a couple of things in there that felt more Herbert. So the as yet human face of one of the mechanoids earlier on, that reminded me quite a lot of the the face changes in June.
yeah.
And there was something about it felt like the sort of meta commentary of the story was about the perils of religiously galvanizing a military population.
You don't say.
I don't know whether that was. I mean, obviously, it sounded like they were towards the end. They became more of a military order, but up until that point, I was thinking that she was going to have to rabble rouse, non-warriors into being this sort of crusading force. But loads of really good stuff in there.
I'd say it's interesting that you landed there because it was one of those ones, and we do it far too often when you're writing it. And I thought, I reckon I could write another 10k words on this because I had this theory that they're not meant to have loads of crusaders with them, and they are meant to go and just do religious things. But this woman is a zealot and has raised an army when she's not meant to. Okay, so it's fun that you got a bit of I'm surprised that she's got a military force. But maybe there's a way I could get that in there and make it more clear.
I tell you what, I don't know if this was intentional at all, but one of the things I was wondering at the end there is basically did she she break the window? Did she
Did she
destroy
do it?
the icon for an excuse to unleash her people?
Wow.
Because you make a big thing of the fact that no one has come forward to say who's done this or anything like that.
Mhm.
So the idea that she's basically just done it herself, possibly because this merciful icon didn't fit her take on the religion, and now she's using that as a pretext. Sort of, I mean, obviously there's nothing explicit in there, but that was where my mind was going with it.
I agree. I got a similar sort of vibe towards the end. I also circled back and thought about the way that she defined the crime at the start. This desecration was a crime of the week. That felt like a dogmatic defense, as in she's not capable of doing something. Like everybody else would know that she's not capable of that because she can't be weak. She can't be a religious because of who she is. So she's sort of defended by her position potentially.
See, that was
yeah.
really clever and interesting. So yes, it was definitely mine.
There you go. I think one of the things that you did which stood out to me, and like sometimes if you did this in a different story, it might not actually work, but I felt like it did work in this, which was that you made a lot of simple stuff more complicated in the way that you described it. So like I got the impression that the guy was writing and that was supposed to be that was in blood, or at least like a red ink, and that was a scarlet fluid. And that theoretically could be seen as like overwriting it, but I think because everything else, like the world, was like that, it wasn't just like it didn't stand out as as a problem. I think that worked really really nicely. There was some stuff about as they move they can they swirl stirrings in the tides of dust. I think was one of the lines.
Yes.
Normally, I might cut that down to her wake left swirls in the tides of dust, like one of those two words. But I think just going hell for leather and giving it 110% really amps up the scale of the world and the scale of the problem that the characters are in. Yeah, I liked it. I liked it a lot. I think it was a good situation as well. Good reaction to that prompt. This idea of a shattered window and using that, capitalizing that for religious war was particularly dark.
I'm really glad that I really enjoyed writing it, so I'm glad that you enjoyed it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do think it's time, however, to welcome Adrian to read us an excerpt that has inspired the prompt for today.
Definitely.
Okay, so yes, this is actually it's I was talking about an excerpt. I've decided to go for a complete little sort of short story in the same setting as the book Days of Shattered Faith. So this is going to be part of a collection which will come out probably the year after. Fantastic. As a sort of a book 3.5 in the series. And it deals with the early history of one of the characters in the book. And this is called A Fire Out of Season. The bell tolls, but the rain mutes it to almost nothing. It's made from one of the old temple constructs that had been battering the liberating forces just a couple of years ago. Now there's just a hollow, rounded torso suspended on ropes, struck on the hour, the Palatine hour, by a hammer connected to a water clock. And the water from the rains gets into the clock despite everyone's best efforts, meaning that in the 2 months of Jarakir's deluge season, the bell strikes at all times and the garrisons learn to ignore it, if they even register it over the constant drumming of the weather. Angeli is 12, a child of soldiers. Her father is a statlos attached to the garrison's quartermaster's office. Her mother is a fellow inquirer from Correct Speech. When she was 3 years younger and before she came with her family over to Jarakir, she thought that meant it was her mother's job to know everything. Now she's 12 and here she thinks it's her mother's job to ask all the awkward questions, which, when you're 12 and just starting to evaluate who you are and where you fit in the world, is the worst thing. This shift in perception has nothing to do with travelling across the sea to Jarakir, and everything to do with growing up. In fact, her mother's role as an inquirer is to interrogate pals and their accessories for potential disloyalty and put the screws on local Jarakiri suspected of harbouring religious views and or people, both of which are expressly banned under the perfection that the Palatine have brought to Jarakir. Angeli will only understand this a lot later and wonder what she would have thought had she understood it when she was 12. Because, make no mistake, her petty rebellions against her mother's rule, her father being only a mute and yielding accessory to maternal authority, do not extend to questioning perfection. Back on the archipelago, she had sat in junior FAL and learnt by rote all the essential truths that explained why the Palatine way was best, why the Palatine sway was necessary, and the terrible degrading conditions that people lived in who hadn't been brought into it. And now she's here in Jarakir, where people really do seem to live in terrible degrading conditions, and every day she sees her people try and help them by explaining how to live by the precepts of Palatine ordinances. She's watched this for years, in the heat, rain, and dry, and somehow the locals never get any better off, and many of them seem to just become poorer and meaner, and obviously that's their fault. She believes, like most pals believe, that the Jarakiri are just innately less perfect. But surely they can learn, if they only let go of their superstitions and nonsense and just try. She wasn't there for the liberation, of course. What the Jarakiri are still mostly calling the invasion because they aren't perfect yet. She didn't see the wonder of the temples, the resplendent cities, the craftsmanship, the artifice. Not that it has been erased, of course, but repurposed. The divine script and holy symbols rubbed off or defaced or repainted, so that those examples of Jarakiri high culture she has seen register as PAL to her, based on whose livery they sport and whose hands they are in. And Jarakir isn't the archipelago. She has fewer and worse friends, and the circle of people her mother feels like associating with is cripplingly small, and the little phalanstery here is undersupplied with books, and the teacher is just a cohort archivist with 2 other full-time jobs to do as well. And inwardly she shifts the blame for all these inconveniences onto the Jarakiri for not allowing themselves to be perfected quickly enough. Today, she will see another side of the Jarakiri. The bell tolls and tolls again, and nobody hears or cares in the garrison refectory. Angeli and her class are having their lunch here. They eat the rolled bread ammies like soldiers do, because if it's good enough for the marching feet of the Palatine army, then it's good enough for kids. She sits in the middle of a row and tries not to knock elbows with her neighbours. You grow up en masse as a PAL kid, even a fellow Inquirer's girl. She's been in the company of various peers all her life. You learn to do a lot of things in close quarters, including bathe and eat. There's a whole passive-aggressive etiquette about what you do with your elbows that can go anywhere from flirting to bullying. She keeps her elbows to herself. A week before, a Palatine week, she put one of those elbows in the ear of a boy who had been constantly jamming his into her arm, and that had seen her up before the teacher, who hadn't known what to do with her because her mother was the fellow Inquirer, and anyway her mother had been far worse and more severe. A boy on the far side of the table, not elbow jabber, says, "Anyone else smell smoke?" Nobody else smells smoke. And the walls are creeping with damp, and so what, honestly, would the odds be? Everyone's been complaining for a month about trying to get fires to even light. Except there is smoke. Angeli lifts her head, frowning. When she concentrates, when she's thinking hard, her face screws up like a wizened apple, like 100 years of puzzled sagacity drop over her features. Her mother is constantly telling her she looks like one of those undead monkeys the local temple used to have before the liberators threw them on a fire in the name of decency. Under the dripping ceiling, dark curls coil like hair. Around that time, the boy across from her spits out his mouthful. "This tastes rotten," he says. He has no manners, and everyone ignores him for the half second it takes for them to find that their own ammies have gone abruptly rancid. Angeli peers into hers and sees things crawling there, seething out of the blackening bread and greenish meat. The officers, her mother included, are dining at the top table. Now one of them stands up, flipping his own plate, looking greenish. "It's an attack!" he bellows. "It's a curse attack! Everyone out and someone check the countermeasures!" Teacher crosses to the door and opens it unwisely. Unwisely because he should have noticed the heat through the handle. The inferno that ravens hungrily into the refectory catches his uniform shirt on fire almost instantly, and he staggers back, screaming. Angeli, her mouldering ammy still in her hands, stares blankly. The fire rushes into the room. It isn't acting like fire. It seems to have a serpent's body, a lizard's legs. It seizes the nearest table in its jaws, and abruptly the wood, the dank, saturated, rainy season wood, is ablaze. The refectory only has the one door. Abruptly, the air in the room is choking. Not just the smoke, which is descending on them all like a flight of smothering black-winged birds, but some innate foulness rising from the spoiled food. Some of the rank-and-file soldiers are running for the door, then falling back from the eager flames. Others clutch for their batons, as though this is a foe they can shoot. Angeli can hear the bell now, faintly through the high, narrow, defensible windows. Too high, narrow, and defensible to get out through. Some of the children are crying or screaming now, but Angeli is 12, and though she's far too old for that, she just stands there, face screwed up, trying to think what to do. The fire is virtually in her face when strong hands grab her by the ribs and pick her up. She will forever have a tiny, shiny mark on her chin from where the searing serpent flicked its tongue at her. Then her father has her. Her mother is busy shouting orders that will not, in the end, accomplish anything. Her father has her under the arms, though. He, the solid Statlos, the clerk, muscles her to one wall, clambers up on a table that is already smouldering. He thrusts her at the window. It's too small. If she was 5, if she was 8 even, but she's 12, she's too big and grown up to fit through windows like some child. Her father, who has only ever been an echo of her mother's harsh voice all her life, has found his voice now. He lays down a parental line, an unyielding rule of conduct for his solitary daughter. You will go through this window. He takes no lip from her. Even when she kicks him in the face, he won't desist, as though this is some iron precept of perfection they somehow omitted from the curriculum at the FAL. He gets her head into the gap. Her shoulders wedge. She twists, getting them into the diagonal, crying, screaming at him that he's hurting her. Her father, the monster, the brute. He shoves. Beneath his feet, the table grinds across the stone floor that is smouldering, the very damp of it catching like oil, the table that is leaping with flames that nip at his shins and ankles. He shoves until her shoulder dislocates. He rams at her until her head snaps the latch of the shutters, and the rain and sun and firelight is in her eyes and splinters across her face. He forces her through the bottleneck of the window and doesn't stop when her forearm, twisted awkwardly across her body, snaps one bone, then the other. He doesn't stop until enough of her is in the torrential outside that momentum and gravity carry her through, and she's gone. Then he turns and grabs the next nearest child and does it again, but Angeli only picks that up in retrospect. Afterwards, when she's in the infirmary with the others, the coughers, the burnt, the sick. Lying in the mud, beside the garrison wall, Angeli sees them, the enemy. They run through the compound with torches that only burn brighter for the rain, with knives that they try to get into any pile they can find. They spin and collapse sometimes when a soldier can bring his baton to bear. One of them is on fire. Not on fire like her father is on fire, like her mother and the others trapped in the refectory. On fire like robes. Striding through the mud and leaving blackened, hissing footprints. A woman with a face like the sun, a priestess. Angeli understands. One of the monsters that Jarakir was liberated from. Or else just a survivor of all those purges and witch hunts finally taking her revenge. She gestures and things that shouldn't even burn spring alight and crackle. Stone cracks, the rain flashes into incendiary sparks. In the garrison, her parents, and most of her classmates burn.
Good Christ, that was fucking brilliant, Adrian. I was
Thank
on
you.
the edge of my seat the whole time. That was absolutely fantastic. Seriously, that's a tour de force.
Very kind, thank you.
It did so many things so well that I don't actually know where to start.
It was, yeah, this is why I'm saying tour de force, because it just did everything really well in a very compact space, and it didn't feel rushed at any point. You know, there were great bits of constructed imagery and also characterization throughout, and it all hung together. And the deeper we got in, the better it all glued in together, and we started to see it more and more become more and more fleshed out. That's really impressive. Thank you for reading that.
No, you're very welcome.
I'm just going to go from the top of my notes. It's always easier to do it chronologically. Straight away from the thing about the bell being water powered and in typhoon season, it just ringing endlessly.
Yeah.
Like I was like straight in, knew what kind of world it was. ready to go. I have to talk, actually. The thing I've got to talk about is the characterization.
Mm.
You managed to hit that kind of infantile mindset of being 12 and thinking you're very clever and far too old to do the things that children do, but in a way that meant, they were able to comprehend the situation, but not process it in the way that we could, which meant that we were getting sort of real-time dramatic irony because we knew what things were for and why things were working the way they were. It was such a great, like, between the narration voice and the character voice, knowing like how dangerous it was and her inability to process it was, it kept me just like heart in my mouth the whole time. Even little moments like, he should have felt the heat through the handle when the guy went to open the door.
Yeah.
Like, now all of a sudden I know just how hot that is. I know just how, before it's even then like a living flame lizard that's eating the tables, and like even that was like, okay, yeah, this is really bad, and this kid is just standing there with, and I quote, a face like a wizened apple. Just just great stuff.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to continue to gush about it because I really enjoyed it. I think there's something to be said about opening on such a well-constructed, strong image as that bell in the rain.
Yeah.
After the first line mutes it as well, so there's already some irony in there. I really fell in love with that initial image, and then from that you built into the characterization, which I think was a really good approach. And I think the first line about Angeli is that she's 12, and the line is a child of soldiers. Just a simple little phrase, a child of soldiers, and that does get her. That absolutely nails her. And then we continue to build from that point. So you don't spend loads of words trying to build this character's identity for us. It's done straight away, and then you're off to the races. And I think there's something to be said for the brevity of that and the speed at which you got off the mark, which is just so rare. So I felt like that was really, really good. Go on, sorry.
I was just saying, I want to talk about the windows. Just for there was a fantastic bit where you say, the high, narrow, and defensible windows, and then immediately say which bit they were, they're too high, they're too narrow, and they're too defensible to actually get out of.
Yeah.
Like this defense mechanism that they've got. Yeah, this will save us, causing their demise. First of all, just that's delicious. But the characters, so Angeli's perspective when she's being forced through that window, of not being like, oh my god, my dad's doing everything, like he's doing everything he can to save me, he's on fire.
Mm-hmm.
She's so focused on what's happening to her physically, like it's hurting my shoulder, it's breaking my arm. Like there's no sort of vision of that someone is sacrificing themselves to give her a chance at life. There's so much you can learn about a character from the fact that, you've said before you read that this is kind of an introduction to a character. I feel like not only do I know everything I need to know about what sort of person they are, or at least were at 12, but I want to know what that has turned into as an adult and where they are now, and it's just really good.
I mean,
I'm always annoyed how
that's
good.
lucky, because you do find that is obviously what you find out in the book. So
Yes. Oh, fantastic. She's almost, I don't know whether this is the right way to sort of mechanically phrase this, but she's almost built from the limitations of her perspective, I think. I mean, obviously it's because she's 12 and all the rest of it, but I think you could apply that approach to anyone, I think, any character. And
I think that's quite a common way I do when I'm writing, because I do a lot of over-the-shoulder third person like this, and I find it an enormously useful constraint, both because it means you can focus on specific parts of the world without people feeling they're missing out on stuff, but also you can play games between what the character understands and what the writer is telling the reader kind of over the top of their head.
Yeah, absolutely. And continuing, obviously, because you're in this short story, it works as a short story, not just an excerpt or anything, because you build everything to this lack of understanding of why the father is doing that. but we're fully on board with the fact that she doesn't know. We get the whole like brutish monster portrayal because we know where the edges of her perception sort of peter out. Whereas, as you were saying, Nico, like obviously, if it was being told from the sort of the father's perspective, it might be a bit more of a heroic portrayal. He's he's like saving kids rather than saving himself. Like it's big stuff. But obviously, he is being extremely brutal. I was wincing, and it increasingly wincing as you went through that description of her being pushed through that window with the dislocation of the shoulder might have been it. For a lot of people, and then you snapped the forearm in two places. And
it was the second break in the forearm, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, oh no, God, no, horrid.
The character that's got a huge impact on this, but doesn't necessarily see loads of, I'm going to say like screen time or like reader time, is the mum, the Inquisitor character. I mean, she's well constructed at the start, so we know who she is, but her presence in that story and being this sort of big, fierce character that then ultimately isn't the one helping her daughter is really strong. There was a line that I wrote down from the first sort of, I think it was in the first third or so. The description of the dad was that he was a mute and yielding accessory to maternal authority. And I've met that man before. I thought all of those characters were really beautifully brought to life, and I love this idea of this like undersupplied outpost on the edge of this, this area of control from the Palestinian army, and all of the stuff that you had about how the Jericho they were innately less perfect. Like that's such a odd but obvious way to show racism in this world.
Yeah.
And that just like the fact that they were made imperfect by their lack of effort. It's so gross. This indoctrinated view that this little girl has, and really well constructed. Really well constructed. I'm just wondering if there's anything else that I needed to go on. Have you got one, Nico?
Just on top of that, explaining that to her, everything she's seen that's good was made by the PAL, but everything there that is really well made was actually made by Jarakiri, and then they, just painted over it or added their own iconography. Like, there's some really nice stuff in there about that kind of colonization and, talking about that, they're less perfect. Not I've been taught that they're lesser than us because they are bad, but it's because we're so good. That's a really interesting perspective to come at that from. I think that's a particularly interesting part of it. Also, I want to know about these batons that shoot. They sound cool. I have a note about that.
Yeah, I think we probably could break this down interminably, really, because there's so many layers to it that it just as you can tell, we were blown away by it. So definitely time to read that when it comes out. I am. I've said it before, and we always joke about how it's difficult going last, but that's really hard to follow, man.
Yeah, I'm so glad I went first, Ben. I'm not going to lie.
Sorry.
No, never apologise for that. I absolutely love that. It's when you get a strong story like that, it's just a joy to be here. So fantastic. Is there anything else you'd like to say about it? I know this is from something that's coming out next year as book 3.5, but
yeah, I mean, though, I guess the one thing I should say about the series as a whole is I am writing this series so that each book is independently pick-upable.
Oh.
So you can pick up the book that's coming out in December, and that should be readable entirely on its own. If you have read the previous ones, there are basically Easter eggs, and you will recognize characters who are kind of flitting in and out. A bit like, I mean, I guess Erickson does it a bit with the Malazan books and that kind of thing, but you can ideally read any book in this series in whatever order, but there's a little extra sort of level of stuff to pick up if you're reading them in the order they're written.
That sounds A, really cool, and B, quite hard to achieve. So well done.
Well, we will see if I can keep doing it, because the fifth book is supposed to be revisiting the location of the first book.
Oh.
Okay. To kind of bring it round and conclude it. And whether that fifth book will be readable independently will seem increasingly unlikely as I go on, but we'll see how we go.
Oh, I think we might have some questions for you about that in the interview section, because I'm interested in the process there. But for now, I am going to just step forwards and read my story, because that we need to do this before I
Stop dodging the draft, Ben.
before I bottle it. Shattered. Turguldur watched the thing as it diligently scribbled stories from the world that was. It might have been called a man once, but Turguldur knew it was both more and less than that. It had yet to notice him, so he studied it from a distance for the last time. The heavy cloak it had asked for was wrapped around its shoulders as though it could feel the chill which persisted outside, and the wrappings on its head hid the damage Turguldur had inflicted as a younger man. Light from the oil lamp he had provided for the thing's work warmed the darkness around it. It was called Gerel. He had named it that for its relationship with light, and though his tribes believed him to be mad, Turguldur claimed it was the last being from before the doom still alive. His knees creaked as he stood to descend the steps, and Turguldur's hunter's senses saw the slight twitch of awareness in Geralt's silhouette before it spoke. Your time is nearly spent, Kargan Turguldur. Must you while away your last days guessing unknowable riddles? Its voice was crystalline, every syllable perfectly formed. I have not come to guess. Turguldur continued down the metal steps into the grotto, hefting the crude mace which had once provided punctuation for their conversations. The underground chamber had not changed much since he had discovered Geralt there all those years ago. The collection of panelled metal desks, devices, and sculptures simply bore a thicker coating of dust. Back then, the world had seemed not only knowable, but conquerable. Few would dare to enter the Greylands, where ancient ruins gathered around great wide paths, and nothing useful grows or dwells. Turguldur had dared, as he did in all things. His riders had scoured the city, bringing him great wealth in curios and artifacts. He had found the steps himself and had descended alone to find someone altogether unexpected. Geralt rose to meet him for the last time, spreading his hands in a gesture of supplication and friendship. The thing was tall, taller than Turguldur, who had been considered monstrous amongst his own people until his age had bent his back. He waved his hand at it. Show me. Geralt obliged him, methodically unwrapping the fabric which covered his head. Unbound, the oily light behind Geralt suffused the translucent glass of its head. As Turguldur watched the glow bounce through the internal prisms, it seemed to take on the consistency of water, flowing in geometric rivulets of rainbow light until it was brought to Geralt's face, where it shone. A crack above its cheek marred its beauty, and Turguldur regretted the blow which had created it. He remembered the sound of the break, travelling deeper and deeper inside Geralt's head. It was the last time Turguldur had struck it. Never before had he encountered anything so completely resistant to pain as a method of coercion. All that remains to us are mysteries, mysteries which you understand, but you won't tell me. I write tales of what I am permitted to divulge. Without the command, I can do no more for you, great king. This I know too well. Your writings are a sign of your goodwill and nothing more. What use do I have for stories? Without the skill to decipher the names and meanings of the people and places in them, they are useless to me. Now, I am old, and perhaps I understand more why you will not tell me the truth of the world that was. The concept of how long I have been alive and how that feels would elude you, even if you were capable of commanding me to explain it. I have been known to tickle fish in the shallows. There is little shallow about me beyond the reasons for my creation. Which were? The question was met by silence. It matters little anymore. My people have left me, saying I am driven to madness by a Greyland sorcerer. You were mad before you met me, O great Kagan. Perhaps. But it is they who break what I have made and senselessly destroy all records of the past. What for? To graze their mounts on greener pastures. It is they who are mad. I suspect the Doom rode for the people of the world that was on a similar stallion. Why else would your makers hide you down here? Now, Doom is on us again. My time spent trying to bring our people back was wasted, and I will be nothing more than additional dust in this room. You came down here to die, with me, and to offer you a gift. Geralt did not reply, but Turgilder saw his light-filled eyes flit downwards to glance at the mace. I offer you an ending. Geralt tilted his head, as though listening for something, one last time. Sorrow pushed the corners of his mouth down for a moment, and Turgilder marvelled at how the features on his glass face were so animated, whilst remaining solid and angular. I accept this kingly gift. Geralt, now beaming with benevolent grief, removed his heavy cloak. The radiance of him filled the room as though 1,000 oil lamps had all been lit at once. Turgilder saw again the smooth stillness of Geralt's translucent limbs and winced at the cracks he had rashly made in this being's flesh. I am sorry, Geralt. Sorry that we failed you before. Sorry that I have failed us again. Turgilder gripped the mace, focusing the last of his strength into the deed. I will strike hard, sorcerer, and will not stop until you are shattered. Turgilder roared, lifted the mace high over his head, and brought it down in one huge movement. As he swung, Geralt's voice chimed one last time. Command code accepted. Even if it had not been too little, it certainly was too late.
I enjoyed that.
Blimey.
There's some... My brain has given me, essentially, you know the aliens in John Carter from Mars? The big, 6 foot... 6-armed, 12-foot tall...
The Green Martians.
Yes. Somewhere between that and a Mongol horseman talking to Echo from Overwatch. And that's a really strange mental image, and I thank you for it, Ben.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I wrote down. I think that was the idea. Yeah. I will admit that potentially writing a main character with a name that has 3 umlauted O's in it was potentially not the one. But it was from a Mongol dictionary thing. So I was trying to. So you got the rider bit right there, Nico. I think both names are Mongol in origin.
I like Torgildor as a name. I think that's... it feels like a warrior's name. Does it have a warrior-y meaning? Or
So rather oddly, I know there's always a link between the stories, isn't there? But it means perfect or complete.
Oh, okay.
So there's an odd link there. And Geralt means light.
Ah. You said, because it was linked to the lamp.
Mm.
There's some lovely turns of phrase in there. The mace that had previously provided punctuation to their conversations was really cool. That says a lot without using many words. But I wrote something down that's my favourite line in the whole thing was, "I'll be nothing more than additional dust in this room." Which is, I think that's what gave me a lot of the warrior image. Actually, was this he was so ready to go, and I like characters who are like that. He talked about how his people had been rash, but he's so accepting, and then so graceful in his willingness with Geralt to offer him an end, because from the sounds of it, he can't die on his own.
Yeah.
That it's... Yeah, I think a really interesting character that I would like to, if you could, in another podcast in the future, write me a story of him in his youth, out there kicking ass and taking names. I would take it.
Yeah, I guess I think the idea is that what interested me about that character was that they weren't that anymore, but they were once that. I think is the
Yeah,
thing, isn't it? It's that kind of reasonably sort of timer's perspective outlook, and somebody that in this world, in this sort of what sounds like a post-apocalyptic world, has tried by essentially being Genghis Khan, tried to pull it all back together and tried to rebuild
yeah.
humanity, and it just hasn't fucking worked. Um,
I
because he's
I
So
particularly like the kind of the light touch world building with phrases like you've got the before the doom and the grey land and the world that was, which is absolutely it's very, very evocative without kind of cluttering the story with too much exposition. I thought that was very good.
Thank you. Yeah, I think once
it's
I'd seized on this idea of the what cultures would work well in a post-apocalypse, and this idea of nomadic riders would potentially do reasonably well, like living off the land and all the
yeah.
rest of it. But obviously, to them, a city is just like wasted space, isn't it? Because it's not you can't graze anything on it, and you can't use it for anything useful.
Loads of stuff to tie your horse to, though.
True, true, true.
The it's interesting. I don't know if it's because I was so fixated on trying to work out what Geralt was that it didn't even occur to me to think that Togeldon might be human. Maybe it's because we've been telling stories already that feel a bit like kind of spacey and 40k and but I did in my brain he was just fully alien coded and I feel like I'm looking forward to listening to it again knowing that he is a man.
Just hard coded him as an alien for you. There you go.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, I know. I feel like it's a bit difficult talking about this story after your story, Adrian, because there's just so much more going on in yours than this. This feels quite light for me after that one, but this I wanted to try and access a different perspective
Yeah.
with the kind of like the glass man um, robot dude to sort of see what that would look like if they were the last things really knocking about from our culture. Um, and yeah, I don't know. It's sort of interesting. I think like potentially if I was to add some more words to this, I might maybe like do some more about the nature of their relationship in the middle.
Yeah.
It becomes quite dialogue heavy. But yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. How would you punch it up, Nico?
I I tell you what, I really like the idea of the that he was always writing the stories and
Yeah.
that he was trying to pass them on. I think knowing a bit more about how that actually made him like feel like what the compulsion was to keep doing it even though it couldn't be understood or like what is it that actually he was hoping to get out of that
Mm,
because I think by the end we had a bit of like we got a bit of the idea that it was kind of his function, so he was just doing it anyway. But what was it that made Geller stay alive, like stay up? I think that would be an
yeah.
interesting thing to spend some words on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. Yeah. And what would you do to that one? Do you think, Adrian? Would you?
I guess a lot would depend. I mean, I think if it is existing purely on its own, then I don't think that anything immediately that swings to mind that I'd want to tinker with it.
Mm,
If you were going to move the setting forward and expand it, then having some sort of trailing thread to lead to the wider world, or building on the ones that you've got there already, would be useful. I know it's very, very hard to fit that in a story without kind of throwing the pacing off.
mm.
Yeah.
But even just a couple of sentences to link to other stories you might take in that world.
That's a great note. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's you sort of make the door that you're going to be walking through later on, sort of thing. Um,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
there's an element of that though. He sent that little command thing at the end. Whatever he ran in the command prompt just before his head got smashed. That could lead anywhere, couldn't it? I'd be interesting to know.
So I think for me that was supposed to be the command that unlocks him. I don't know. I feel like it didn't come across very well, but basically, like, he'd been trying for years to unlock this thing. He tried to torture it to unlock it, to find out and get more from this thing, rather than these kind of vague stories that he was writing down. And then in killing it, unlocks it right as he was doing it. So
Okay.
so potentially that needed to be a bit clearer.
That just might be an IT person thing, then. Just because when I hear command, my brain's like, I immediately think of running something in the command line. So
Absolutely.
like the computer processing something. So yeah, very specifically for me and about 1,000 other people, change that one line.
No, I think it's okay. I think I could easily lift that out and just replace it with password or something similar, like key phrase maybe.
Oh, key phrase is a nice one.
Anyway, I think that's enough on that. Those were some stories. I mean, I'm struggling to even talk about my story because I'm still thinking about your story, Adrian. Yeah, no, that was really impressive. I think it'd be a really good idea if you could let people know where they can follow you online, where they can keep up to date with your news, and potentially where they can buy your books as well.
Yeah, sure. Well, so I mean, online, my main platform at the moment is Blue Sky.
Yes.
Where I'm at Apt Shadow. I've also got a website which is adriantchaikovsky.com. That's got a contact form. So if you do want to get in touch with me, that's the way to do it. And I mean, books by wherever you would normally get books. Hopefully, you can find mine there. I mean, I'm always unexposed to people going to their local independent bookshops if they got them handy.
Fantastic. Yeah, that question's a little bit redundant for you, isn't it? Your books are in most places that you can find books. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, fantastic. This has been a truly wonderful experience hearing the stories. But I think we need to break it off now, and everyone can join us for the next episode for the interview. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For rich ginger tones on their scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?